And when I look at London, he's, to me, a guy who could return wide receiver 1 overall value inside of the second round. And people might say kind of like pump the brakes a little bit. But what we've seen over the last 4 wide receiver 1 finishes is the player that leads the NFL in targets, leads the NFL in catches, finishes as the wide receiver 1 overall. With London, I have that. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
We are less than 100 days away from the start of the NFL season and the start of fantasy football season. Theo Gremminger with Fantasy Football Daily right here over at Fantasy Points. Today I'm joined by Jagger Maye of Fast Draft. I've recorded so many podcasts with Jagger at this point. These have all been Dynasty podcasts. Today we're going to take it a little bit more into 2025 only. We're going to flag plant some of our favorite guys at ADP. We're going to talk about a number of players that we think can help you win this season in fantasy football. But Jagger, before we dive in, let's talk about some of the recent news. It's never a dull moment in this thing of ours. And we have 2 tight ends that have come up as potential trade targets this week. Talking about Jonnu Smith, the latest rumors are he wants to restructure his deal with Miami. Miami doesn't necessarily want to pay him what he wants, and now he might get traded. And the team that is being mentioned is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and him being reunited with Arthur Smith. Smith had him in Atlanta, Smith had him in Tennessee, and now wants him in Pittsburgh. Your thoughts on a potential Jonnu Smith trade? How bad would this be for him in fantasy?
I'm going to be honest. I think I want him where he's at. We kind of talked pre-show at it. I like the role that he's in. It's clear what Mike McDaniel wanted. They wanted an underneath guy who can create yak. And now if he goes to a place without a quarterback and they wanted to be the number 2, I don't know if I don't believe that he's ever going to be the same player that he would be in Miami. I just don't believe in Arthur Smith like that. I get what we saw in Atlanta and how much he liked him, and I get what we saw in Tennessee. It's just always going to be a low volume offense and not really anything that I want a part of. I'm basically off the Steelers outside of like Caleb Johnson at this point.
Yeah, and I'm a little more bullish on DK Metcalf than you are this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a little more bullish than a lot of people are on DK. But when it comes down to it, Arthur Smith offenses never support a secondary receiver.
Ever.
And it's ever. And I think that the peak target season for a number 2 target in an Arthur Smith-led offense, and this is including his time in Tennessee, his time in Atlanta, and now his time in Pittsburgh, is 94 targets. Every other year, it's been way fewer targets than that. And when we look at Jonnu Smith last year in Miami, unbelievable production, 111 targets, 88 catches last year, the tight end 5 in points per game. And he was top 5 in receiving yardage, yak, and red zone targets. That sort of role would be completely eliminated in Pittsburgh. Also, you'd have Pat Freiermuth still there. So are they just going to be a heavy 12 team? Like, I don't know. The whole thing sounds like a complete mess for fantasy football. I really hope that if Jonnu Smith gets moved, we don't see him go to Pittsburgh. It's some mystery team coming out of the woodworks, or we just see Miami simply just pay Jonnu Smith. And Jonnu Smith, I think, is in a really good spot if he remains a Miami Dolphin. If he ends up being a Pittsburgh Steeler, I think we're talking about a guy who should drop down significantly in the tight end ranking, somewhere down from a mid tight end 1, probably to a low end tight end 1 with some downside risk. Would you sort of be about there in your rankings?
Yeah. And he's someone I was targeting in redraft, especially if you miss out on the top end tight ends. He's someone I want, and I kind of double up in that tier. That would definitely shove me off to some of these other guys, and particularly one I'm going to talk about as someone I like. But in Dynasty, you got to think about too, from that spin, he's someone who was like the cusp of where it wasn't really worth trading him for the production. And now you got a bag at that point that it's going to be hard to sell unless someone believes in the number 2 target in Arthur Smith. offense. And that's the real move there. If he does go to Steelers, you need to sell it, and no matter what, I guess in Dynasty or whatever. And then if we're talking about redraft, avoid him, but you need to sell it as it's the number 2 target. You don't want it, but maybe someone else does.
Yeah, depending on the format, you're talking about Jonnu somewhere in that tight end 6 to 8 range. So
yeah,
the market's very, very much into him. Another tight end who's extremely beat up in ADP right now, and justifiably so. Kyle Pitts has been a very disappointing player at ADP in 3 out of his 4 seasons as a pro. Rookie year, Kyle Pitts had 1,000 receiving yards, didn't hit with touchdown catches, but flashed immense potential at 68 receptions, had 1,000 receiving yards at only 21 years old. This is a player that was drafted 4th overall in the NFL draft. It's been sort of a lost few seasons. Last year, 47 catches, 600 receiving yards, 4 touchdown grabs. Really a lot more disappointment for fantasy managers. Had a couple of games where he flashed, but that's sort of the tale of Kyle Pitts. Now you're getting rumors that Kyle Pitts could be moved. This one interests me, though. You're talking about a 24-year-old with 196 career receptions. Being on a new team for Pitts seems like almost a necessity for him sort of to resurrect his value. If he's going to return to giving you fantasy football production, I think being on a new team would be almost a must. And what's interesting is I think you're going to hear a lot of groans out there for people saying, Theo, I don't want to hear that. Like, Kyle Pitts has burned me for all these seasons in a row. Stop talking about Kyle Pitts. But at the end of the day, tight ends oftentimes is a position where the players hit a little bit later in their career. So with him being only 24 years old with this sort of production, I think there's going to be a pretty significant market for him. What are your thoughts on that? Pushback, agreement? Where are you at, Jagger?
I mean, I think you nailed it because it just feels like he's not engaged. And you could see, especially when you examine Atlanta's last several seasons of disappointment, essentially since they've gotten to Kyle Pitts, and you know how young people think, because everyone's like, well, he's been in the league 3 years, 24, you're still, a baby in comparison to a lot of these people. So he's just not engaged, doesn't care anymore. And moreover, it just seems like the coaching staff has given up on him. There's videos like Coach Speak Index, and I joked, they make it sound like Kyle Pitts needs to sound out the plays when he reads them. They just don't like him. It doesn't sound good. Then when you have that bad relationship, if this is a player that needs to go somewhere else. Secondly, I think he's a little bit more scheme dependent than a lot of people think. If you need a blocking tight end, he's not it. And if you have a slot player that is better than, let's say, Kyle Pitts would be, then you're in trouble as far as using him as a fantasy asset. So it's just who really wants him and who can take the chance, because he's young, he's 24. We forget, and I think I actually just saw a chart that the apex production for tight ends is like 2 to 3 years later than running backs, even later than wide receivers. To me, it would be hopeful. And his price now, I know to say that he's a buy is hurtful or you should draft him, but you're drafting him in best ball as a tight end 2 Dynasty. He's kind of free and a throw in at this point, as far as a bigger deal,
Yeah, his dynasty value has gone cratering down, especially with this rookie class coming in with multiple tight ends. Like, we're going to talk about one of your tight ends a little bit later who's a rookie. But these rookie tight ends, there's every time there's new players come into the league, a guy like a Kyle Pitts kind of seems to take a step back. But at the end of the day, there's a few teams that I think stand out to me. New England would be an interesting one because there's a lack of pass catching weapons there. Hunter Henry is 31 years old, I believe, or 30 years old. And you could also see with Josh McDaniel, Mike Vrabel, you could see them going to 12 personnel and using Kyle Pitts as sort of the move tight end in that offense. I think Houston's interesting because we've seen them acquire Christian Kirk via trade. We saw them get Joe Mixon via trade. Why not just add a tight end, continue that? And this whole offseason has been sort of let's get pass catchers around CJ Stroud. We saw them obviously draft Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins, acquire Christian Kirk, and then draft Woody Marks in the 4th round. Add a bunch of guys who caught a lot of passes. Maybe they could also do that with Kyle Pitts. I think Dalton Schultz, obviously a replacement level player at this point. a couple of teams, like those stand out. New York has been mentioned.
Titans.
Philly, the Titans would be, Titans would be interesting. Philadelphia, he was a star high school player at Archbishop Wood in Philly, won a state championship there. And with Dallas Goedert being 30 on a restructured deal. Talk about the Titans, though. I didn't necessarily think about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Titans don't have that archetype. Like Elick Ayomanor, maybe, but he was a 4th round pick. Having a good red zone target like Kyle Pitts would make a lot of sense. We got two sides of the equation here, where I really want Pitts to move. I really want Jonnu Smith to stay where he's at. And knowing how fantasy works, probably the opposite will happen to both.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah, this will be an interesting one to pay attention to. Like we talked about in the pre-show, we love it, though, because it keeps us on our toes and it actually gives us something to talk about. Jagger, you took over the Fast Draft YouTube channel, putting out some really high-quality content over there. I had a chance to go over on your show. Let me know what you're doing video-wise, what you're doing in terms of podcasts, and where they can find your work.
Yeah, it's just over on YouTube, over at Fast Draft. I have one podcast that's a long form show every week, and then 2 shorter videos. I've been pretty Dynasty centric right now, just because that's after the draft, that's where we're all living at. But I'm about to shift into best ball, and I'm going from more of the buy or sell takes from Dynasty, and I'm going into the actual strategy and roster construction of best ball. As Fast Draft, we get into our full tournament, and as like everyone else has gotten into in best ball as well, because we're starting to see everyone talk exposure right now, all the sickos out there. And then after too long, like you said, it's less than 100 days. We're just talking straight up, normal redraft season. So
100%. A big shout out to you for your video work. You put out really, really high quality video production, really easy to take in, and very, very sharp takes as well. So highly recommend checking out all of Jagger's work. Let's talk about offenses, though. And I just recorded a show with Jim Coventry of RotoWire where we talked about the new offensive coordinators and their potential impact to fantasy football this season. You can check that one out right here on the Fantasy Football Daily podcast feed. But when we talk about offenses that break out, we see it time and time again. Every single year, we get into this, let's find the best possible value at ADP. I like this player. I want to rank him ahead of this player. But at the end of the day, if you can just pick that offense that is underrated, it's going to provide multiple ADP returns. Last year, we saw it with Washington. We saw it with Tampa Bay. Washington ends up producing a top 5 scorer at quarterback with Jaden Daniels. Also, Terry McLaurin gives you his career year at wide receiver. But it's not just last year. It's pretty much every year where a team can significantly improve their points per game, leading to multiple ADP wins. Who's an offense that you think could be underrated right now that fantasy managers need to keep an eye on?
I'm gonna cheat and give you 2, because one of them is my own team, so I want to give like some people advice other than some that some could consider bias. But my team, I'm really in on the Patriots, and hear me out. I understand that they've been pretty ugly, and I understand that Josh McDaniels is there, but Josh McDaniels in the OC chair in Foxborough is the only thing that works. It works there, and he knows what he's doing. And now that we have Vrabel here, now that we have Drake Maye, who we've seen the talent, we've seen the potential, we see the pieces that they're building around him, and more specifically, what Josh McDaniels likes to do. And I want to go to the third layer of the fantasy strategy. I find them an incredibly easy stack to build. Let's say if you're going to do Superflex, because we have Superflex Puppy going right now, or especially if you're in 1 QB leagues, you can get like a naked Puka Nacua or high-end wide receiver, and then get the most scorers or the most anticipated scores in the Patriots offense all at a relatively cheap cost right now. You can get Drake Maye, then you can get Travion Henderson well after a lot of people have gotten RB1s, RB2s in some cases. And then Kyle Williams is someone who I'm incredibly bullish on at his ADP later. So that's just like one particular offense I'm all in on. The other one I know that everyone's hot for, I am too. It's the Jaguars for the same reason, where you can get Brian Thomas Jr. Trevor Lawrence is incredibly cheap now, who I'm going to talk about, so I'm not going to stay there too long. But again, the stack isn't just getting receivers, but Bashal Tutin and Brenton Strange are at a relatively cheap cost, where you can build a very good stack on an offense that is now has Liam Cohen, and we know that that's been productive in the past.
Yeah, I just recorded a School of Scott with Ryan Heath, where we talked about our strength of schedule data over at this one you could find over at Fantasy Points in 4 separate articles, but we also dropped a lot of the information over on the pod. And what was interesting was the Jaguars have a really, really strong strength of schedule for the tight end and the quarterback position. You're going to talk a little bit about Trevor Lawrence a little bit later, but Liam Cohen last year, you're talking about a guy who led Tampa Bay to 29 points per game. Now he has an opportunity to get off to a fast start. Everyone knows that Brian Thomas, Travis Hunter are going to be a really, really exciting wide receiver pair. You bring up Bashal Tutin and the speed he brings at running back. But I think, the Trevor Lawrence, Brenton Strange, there's multiple pieces to this offense that could deliver. It's sort of a double bet. If you think Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter are going to put up huge numbers, that could also mean that the overall passing game is delivering, and Trevor Lawrence certainly could do it. And the running game, what's interesting for us as fantasy managers is it's such an ambiguous running back room that even if you kind of disagree with us on Bashal Tutin, then by all means take some shots on Tank Bigsby or Travis Etienne, because there will be value there. We saw what Liam Cohen was able to do last year with Bucky Irving. Really, really a sharp mind offensively. New England's interesting. I'm really like the Travion Henderson call. He's super fun, where he's still going to cost you, but he's not going to cost you sort of what he could potentially, because people have concerns about the offensive line quality in New England, the overall offense quality. So Henderson's a super interesting one. And it's really about Drake Maye, because you're able to get Drake Maye sort of as a mid QB2, had over 400 rushing yards last year. What if they just go full Drake Maye running ability this year? McDaniel does a lot of design runs. Then you're talking about a guy who I think would be 650 rushing yards, maybe 700 rushing yards. Drake Maye is a really, really high quality scrambler and a guy who can accumulate first downs as a runner. So I love both those calls, Jagger. Those were really, really strong ones. But let's get started with these flag plants. Let's talk about these 10 players. I'm going to pass it over to you, because I think we're both sort of on the same wavelength with class of 2023 wide receivers, both high-end target earners. Yours is a little bit cheaper than mine. Tell everybody about your bullish nature on Garrett Wilson. And what's funny is I dropped my top 50 rankings over at Fantasy Points this week, and I had Garrett Wilson pretty comfortably high, but there's some other people in the fantasy industry fading him, worrying about the pass volume in New York. There's no target competition whatsoever. Talk about Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, you've kind of nailed it. The biggest target competition, I think, at this point is a rookie tight end and Arian Smith, who we've seen OTA hype about. He's a fast guy running around, in shorts. We don't really know how good he is at this point. And even when he's had competition, like with Devontae Adams there last year, he has still been a top target earner. And then on top of that, Justin Fields is a lot of the reason that people want to fade. And I think that's understandable. But, the point that I've made for both of these players is that they're 2 Ohio State guys that have never had an ideal situation. Now we have a coach that I've never heard a coaching staff talk this way about Justin Fields since Justin Fields was drafted by the Bears. First of all, they just real confident of what they're going to do. And I really buy into having the passing game coordinator that the Lions had, because everyone forgets that Jared Goff was an ugly duckling a long time as well, but they built a system that played to his strengths. So I'm willing to buy into that as well. So at cost, when you've had an elite target earner that's still within his elite production age apex, who just got in an ideal system for production. And all he has is a quarterback who's had a rough start with notoriously difficult offensive coordinators. By difficult, I mean just poor. That's, to me, a gray zone where I'm going to take shots every time because I think the upside's just too juicy.
Yeah, I have him at number 27 overall in my top 50. But Garrett Wilson, like when you look at it, Garrett Wilson is a guy who is an elite target earner. Through his first 3 seasons, he's 7th all time in receptions and has 279 of them. Like, it's unbelievable. Last year, he had 101 receptions. This is a career high for him. 153 targets. This was 4th in the NFL. And like you said, like, none of the guys there, Mason Taylor, Arian Smith, Malachi Corley, none of those guys are going to sap targets away from Wilson. So even if they go really run heavy, this is a team where I think it's going to be the RPO with Justin Fields running a lot of RPO. Like, Garrett Wilson has big play potential as a hyper-focused wide receiver 1. Plus, we get a little shower, locker room narrative, a former Ohio State quarterback. There's a lot to like right there with Garrett Wilson. And when you talk about the coach speak, Aaron Glenn like has kind of like diminished any positivity about Breece Hall by praising the other running backs. But with Garrett Wilson, he's all over him. He's like, we're going to get him the ball over and over again. And this is a former player himself. Like, he knows the best player on his offense. So I'm with you. I think Garrett Wilson, an easy click. And also Jagger, like we've seen in the past where Garrett Wilson steams up and is like a 1-2 turn guy in redraft. You don't have to make that bet anymore. You're able to get him in like the 3rd round. So I love that one. For me, I'll stay at the wide receiver position, and I'm going to talk about Drake London. Drake London, we saw him break out last year. He's only 23 years old. The Zach Robinson offense worked out very, very well for him. Finished as the wide receiver 5 overall last year. A huge leap forward for a player that we sort of wanted a lot more when he was attached to Arthur Smith. He had 100 catches last year, 1,271 receiving yards, 9 touchdown grabs. But what I think is super interesting is just how much usage, truly elite usage, we saw when Michael Penix took over. It actually ticked up. In 3 Michael Penix starts, Drake London was targeted on 39% of the passes. Insane. He also had a first read rate of 45.1%. So Michael Penix really hyper-targeted London. And when I look at London, he's, to me, a guy who could return wide receiver 1 overall value inside of the 2nd round. And people might say kind of like pump the brakes a little bit. But what we've seen over the last 4 wide receiver 1 finishes is the player that leads the NFL in targets, leads the NFL in catches, finishes as the wide receiver 1 overall. With London, I have that. And we bring up the Kyle Pitts potential trade. This is a team that's going to be even more wide receiver centric if, in fact, Pitts is traded. None of the tight ends still on the Atlanta roster have done anything significantly. Like, they're almost like non-names. I mean, it's kind of like they'd almost have to sign some guy off the street. The current tight ends on the roster have combined for 27 total NFL catches, the non-Kyle Pitts tight ends there in Atlanta. So Drake London, I think, is set to absolutely explode this year. Your quick thoughts on London?
Love London. It's weird. I haven't gotten enough shares, especially in best ball, of this offense. And Drake London is in a good sweet spot, kind of like Garrett Wilson, where you're able to build I would say a running backs heavier roster, take shots on Bijan, take shots on Jahmyr Gibbs, and then still get a really good wide receiver like Drake London later. It like you said, it's an easy click a lot of times, you know.
Jagger, we sort of like gave a little sneak preview to Trevor Lawrence. Talk about your enthusiasm for him this season.
And I'll keep this one shorter since I kind of split this up. I think it's without a doubt easy to say that Trevor Lawrence was a better prospect than Baker Mayfield and has just better natural talent. I think it's also easy to say that Trevor Lawrence hasn't had that great of a situation where he had Urban Meyer. And then let's think about Doug Peterson. Yeah, he won that Super Bowl, but we saw even fairly quickly after he won, the Eagles move on for Doug Peterson, and then they immediately improved. So when you think about all the talent, all the things that they've done for the Jaguars, yeah, Trevor Lawrence has been up and down, but Doug Peterson hasn't been that well. And then Liam Cohen, what he can do, what he's done with a reclamation project like Baker Mayfield. Why wouldn't you want Trevor Lawrence? And you said it, if we were expecting big things from Brian Thomas Jr., we saw him tear it up with Mac Jones in a Doug Peterson offense. If we expect a lot from Travis Hunter, almost mathematically, you have to think that matters for Trevor Lawrence. And then my final point on him, we forget about his mobility and what he can add. And I wouldn't say it's like Drake May heavy, especially not Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but I would think more of those Daniel Jones miles, kind of that adds a little bit of upside to fantasy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And there's a ton of pressure on Trevor Lawrence this year, again, because of the quality at the wide receiver position, but they don't have a first round pick next year either. So he's really insulated. This is a guy that I think that Liam Cohen doesn't take the job. And let's remember, Liam Cohen's a guy who, setting the world on fire, could have been in a Ben Johnson-like situation this year in Tampa Bay and been a red-hot name. Instead, takes this Jaguars job. Cohen is a guy that I don't think takes that job unless he has a lot of confidence that he can get it going with Trevor Lawrence, former number 1 overall pick, and he's flashed for us in fantasy. He had that very strong second season where the Jaguars were sort of really like a fun team. They won that crazy playoff game. And Trevor Lawrence finished as a mid QB1 that year. Maybe we see a year 5 resurgence. You make a lot of strong arguments for it. I'm going to go back to the wide receiver well. One player that I just can't understand their current ADP is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Now, JSN's a player that last year catches 100 passes, ties the Seattle all-time record for receptions in a season. He's 23 years old, and people are, I think, fading him because of quarterback question marks in Seattle with Sam Darnold, and also the fact that Cooper Kupp is going to push JSN out of a full-time slot role. Will he get fewer easy button looks when he leaves the slot? Last year, he had the most slot snaps in the entire NFL, but I think this is a showing that Seattle views him as a guy who can do a lot more. 2 years ago, he was surrounded by Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, had a sort of a rough rookie season in terms of where we were drafting him versus the production he had on the field. Last year, a massive, massive breakout. But when you look at JSN, is this a guy that needs to be parked in the slot, or is this a guy with more versatility and a little bit more room to run in terms of spike weeks? And I think he showed it last year. We saw that Rams game where he had just a massive, massive game in week 9 where he scored 37 fantasy points. That was a game where DK Metcalf was banged up and missed. And that game, JSN had a much higher ADOT, was used on downfield targets, and really, really produced. Now you factor in the Clint Kubiak offense, where you're going to see fullbacks utilized, you're going to see additional blockers out there, and JSN having a chance to really, really produce as a hyper-targeted player. Another interesting thing is JSN last year was a sub 25% target share player. I think this year he could be like a 27, 28% target share guy. I think JSN has a lot more ceiling to him than the market is giving him. They're almost treating him as like a mid wide receiver 2, when I think really he's going to be a wide receiver 1. I think JSN for me is a smash right now. Your thoughts?
He's a smash, and he's especially a smash when you consider he's easy to stack, because you can get Sam Darnold as a QB2 and 1 QB, and then especially he's arguably a QB3 sometimes in Superflex, like the Superflex puppy right now. So it's fairly easy to get him. But to your point, a lot of people think that, oh, he's just a slot. The NFL doesn't work like that anymore. It's not that the fact that small guys, well, you got to stay here, on the inside. There's another position that people forget about called Z flanker that we see Zay Flowers do over in Baltimore. And JSN's got more size to him and arguably the same athleticism and route running. So if Zay Flowers, who I really like, can do the same thing playing on the outside, why wouldn't JSN, who put up more points than Zay Flowers, arguably do, I would say, better, have put up better production? And here's my last point. We might be swapping out lower leverage touches, meaning that stuff that's lower ADOT, for some high leverage catches that could be down deep that offsets a lot of the PPR value for just yardage. And I think that's one aspect that a lot of people are forgetting.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is he's not going to disappear from the slot either.
Yeah.
It's just going to be fewer snaps. Like Cooper Kupp's going to have to play a little bit more inside. He's older. We think he's going to be in the slot a lot. But at the end of the day, JSN becoming a 45% slot rate, I think that's about right. And when we look at guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys like CeeDee Lamb that have put up immense wide receiver one seasons, that's about the wheelhouse. A guy like CeeDee Lamb is like in the slot like 46 to 50% of the time. Amon-Ra St. Brown about the same. And I think that's sort of the archetype for JSN to evolve his game and his fantasy football production. So I'm just absolutely shocked that there's drafters taking a guy like 31-year-old Tyreek Hill ahead of 23-year-old Jaxon Smith-Njigba. That sort of like argument, to me, we're almost capping the unknown upside argument for a guy like JSN and saying, oh, he is what he is. His game is not nuanced enough or versatile enough to take that next step. And I think that's just the wrong way to go about doing it. I loved him in the draft process coming out of Ohio State. And I think we're going to see people saying, I wish I would have taken a little more JSN this season. Let's kick it back over to you. You have an interesting one. You have a running back, and this is a player that sort of broke out last year, was a huge value to drafters in the first month of the season, and now is one of the higher drafted RB2s. But the way you're flag planning him, it seems like you think he's the back to roster in Minnesota.
Yeah, and a lot of it is Aaron Jones's age, and he's never been a full-time back, or at least he had like one or two seasons where he was doing a lot, but he's been complimentary. And I kind of want to point towards he's putting up legitimate RB1 numbers in the 49ers system, but I also want to point out that what these coaches that have come from the Kyle Shanahan system and what they do with their running backs, essentially they trade these like Pokemon cards, guys. They're like, hey, this guy knows the system. So they're like, all right, come over here. And then moreover, we've seen that the Vikings don't exactly value running back. And I don't mean that as like they don't value him as a staple in their offense, but they're able to build their production, let's say in the aggregate, not unlike we've seen like the joke when from Moneyball, that's kind of how they've built their backfield. And then when you think about what Aaron Jones does and what Jordan Mason brings to this offense, is just a north and south runner who can, who despite his size and his running style can beat the edge and really excel in the system. I'm kind of all in at his cost, because you're saying he's like going as an RB2 right now in best ball. I'm getting him as my third running back sometimes fourth, depending on my build. And for that upside, it's easy to get these unique builds. Let's say if you're going to do fast draft, and you're in the Flex 4 tournament, you can get wide receiver early and then get some of these running backs and get someone who's not heavily rostered for diversity like Jordan Mason into your lineup that has that upside. Or if you're in something like Best Ball Mania, you can build, let's say, a 4 running back build, and you can have a lot more wide receiver diversity to give you a lot of options there and have 4 strong running backs with Jordan Mason there. I think Aaron Jones is still going to be a part of that offense, but I do think that Father Time is going to win at some point, especially when you think about the type of back that Aaron Jones is. I think it would be more of a, we might need to worry in 2-minute drill situations.
A lot to unpack there. Jordan Mason, like last year, I think it's not too difficult for drafters to remember just the hysteria with Jordan Mason over the first month of the season, where he was giving us continual RB1 weeks. This is an interesting player. Last year, he had 9 runs over 20 yards, which would put him put him inside the top 10, actually put him at 6th in the NFL in rushes over 20 yards last year, despite having significantly less rush attempts than some of the other guys that were getting that sort of explosiveness. Jordan Mason, also, there's rumors that they might just hand him the goal line role. Aaron Jones had a ton of volume last year, but like you said, Aaron Jones north of 30. They go and they acquire Jordan Mason. You also have a little bit more mobility with J.J. McCarthy than we have seen last year with Sam Darnold. I think McCarthy has a little more straight line speed. Does that do anything for the backs? Jordan Mason's super interesting. It's sort of last year drafters got very comfortable with these old backs not getting hurt. That's not usually the norm.
Exactly.
Especially with Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has missed time in multiple seasons of his career. Jordan Mason's exactly the kind of bet that I think you should be making. And Jagger, if you're wrong, it's not costing me a premium draft pick. So there's a lot to like with this one.
Yeah, that's it. It's like that sweet spot. Like, you nailed it right there, where it's like, I love Aaron Jones, and when he's healthy, he will be a part of that offense. But when's the last healthy Aaron Jones season we've seen? It's just not there in the cards.
Yeah, a lot of the whole season, like, it's these old guys who stayed healthy last year. Is it going to get drafters in trouble this year to treat it almost exactly the same? And I think just investing in some of these high-end potential handcuffs is probably the way to go about, like, everything sort of getting back to normalcy and back to the mean. And with Jordan Mason, it's almost a handcuff plus, because this could be, instead of some of these guys, like, betting on a guy like Trey Benson saying, James Conner, he'll break down, those sort of bets, I'm going to have unusable weeks. Unlike Jordan Mason, where I can put him in my RB2 spot if I have like a hero RB build, potentially a flex. So I really like that call. Super interesting player. For me, I was going to talk about another wide receiver, but I'll save him because I've gone wide receiver. I'm going to talk about a running back. And we're also sort of like in line with our high-end running backs we're flag planting, because these guys are very close in ADP. But Chuba Hubbard, to me, is such a value right now. Chuba Hubbard is 25 years old, finished as an RB1 last year. He was top 10 in yards per carry, 11th in rushing touchdowns, 9th in first down runs, 11th in explosive run percentage, like, provided you juice as a runner. He also was 5th in total carries inside of the 15-yard line. Despite Carolina's issues as an offense, Chuba Hubbard really, really delivered. 6th in yards after contact, and he had over 50 targets. We also have Dave Canales, who is sort of the running back whisperer. Back-to-back years, he's delivered us 2 of the better RB ADP wins. It was Rachaad White in 2023 in Tampa Bay, Chuba Hubbard last year in Carolina. Both of these guys not only delivered fantasy scoring numbers, but predictable weekly volume, where you knew if you started these guys, they're going to touch the ball a lot. Then you add into the fact that I think Carolina's offense is going to be very much improved. Last year, we saw them invest significant money into the interior of their offensive line to help Bryce Young. This year, we see them drafting Tet McMillan in the first round. Last year, of course, they drafted Xavier Legette. They signed Jalen Coker as an undrafted free agent. This is an offense that I think in year 2 with Dave Canales is going to take a big step forward. And I think Chuba Hubbard returning running back 1 value is in the wheelhouse. And again, kind of like JSN, it's a guy that people are treating more like a mid to low end RB2 value. To me, I think he's got a little bit more room to run in his profile, and I love the usage.
Yeah, he's one of, I was excited that you put Chuba Hubbard here, because between my running back that I'm going to talk about in a little bit and this one, I basically ping pong between them and best ball right now. And they're 2 of my favorites. And I almost picked a Chuba Hubbard because, like you said, this is legitimate safe RB1 floor. I think that people are drafting significantly later than when you get into the strategy and the team building aspect of it. You can easily get strong wide receivers or strong pass catchers in quarterback, and then get someone like Hubbard later, and then have a safe running back. So you're not playing the true zero RB game where you're just hoping, players get injured, or like Jordan Mason becomes your RB1 and not like your RB3. And then it's people underrate how much Carolina really likes him. They just signed him for the extension, even after having Jonathan Brooks there. And he's the longest tenured Panther player. There's just so many layers as to why he's just, I think, one of the most underrated players in the NFL.
He also had a north of 10% target share, which people don't necessarily associate with Chuba Hubbard. This is a guy that can catch the football. He's a balanced back. Really, really a fun click. Talk about Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, Kenneth Walker, I think it's kind of the same vein as Chuba Hubbard. And one huge factor that I want to bring up is something that you've already said, which is Klint Kubiak. We already kind of talked about that with JSN, but we kind of underrate just how much the running game is the engine of his offense. They use a lot of play action. And like you said, they use a lot of fullbacks, which is a gold mine. Moreover, we saw something last year from Kenneth Walker that we had always hoped for, which is that receiving work. And they've already said that they want to get him more and more touches. So especially when even like Ashton Genty, all these like superstar running backs are going way higher, you have an opportunity to have someone who has true RB1 upside. And if not the RB1 upside week to week, I'm not saying overall, but like week to week, he does have high upside if he has that receiving volume in an offense that has a pretty stationary quarterback. There's a lot of room for dump offs. And then people think, well, Zach Charbonnet's there. Have you heard them say anything about Charbonnet? I think we even had rumblings of trades. So I think both Chuba Hubbard and Kenneth Walker, like I said, I'm ping-ponging them.
Yeah, Kenneth Walker's a player that I'm extremely high on. I have him really high up in my top 50 right now. Walker's a guy that, like, everything about his profile just screams like he could have a massive, massive season. 16.5 points per game last year. We talk about like Klint Kubiak. Last year, Alvin Kamara had 950 rushing yards, finishes with 19 points per game last year. Kamara was one of the better ADP wins he could have made. And I think Walker right now is kind of criminally underrated. I talked about JSN. You talked about Walker. I think both of these guys are cheaper in ADP because people don't believe in Sam Darnold. And I'm not going to sit here flag planting Sam Darnold, but I don't think Sam Darnold is going to be a disaster for Seattle. I think the scheme is going to be strong. They've done what they can to improve the offensive line. And Kubiak bringing over this sort of Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan type system is going to be really, really strong for both of these players. Walker's really, really fun. This is a guy, like, I love that you bring up the pass catching upside. I took a massive, massive step forward as a pass catcher last year, and that was sort of non-existent for him in his first 2 seasons as a pro. So I'm really into Walker. I think this is a really, really fun click to be had. And again, like Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, in multiple formats right now, you're getting these guys around running back 18, running back 19 level. I wouldn't be surprised if both of them finish inside the top 10 scorers at the running back position. And we can be ageist on these ones. These guys are younger players as well. We don't have to bet on some 29-year-old, 28-year-old running back here. We're able to bet on younger running backs. So very, very fun. I'll take it back to the wide receiver position. And this is a sort of a simple bet for me. Jauan Jennings. Right now, Jauan Jennings, like, this is such an easy click. The market has continually pushed down Jauan Jennings. It's almost like people are treating him like he was a fake guy who came off the waiver wire and produced. Like, Jauan Jennings was a 7th round pick. He's overcome that, worked his way up, and become one of Brock Purdy's favorite targets. Last year, he led San Francisco in multiple categories and had a really, really strong season. And then this year, you're still able to get him as the wide receiver 37. Now, I think this could trend up a little bit because, of course, Ricky Pearsall has a hamstring issue. They're really downplaying the hamstring issue for Pearsall. 49ers as an organization, I don't know if they're one you necessarily want to trust when it comes to giving us the truth on injuries. So let's say Pearsall comes back and is there for all of training camp. That's probably the best bet. But Pearsall is a guy who needs as many reps as possible. Last year, obviously, missed a good portion of the season was shot and missed all that time. Purcell obviously ended the year very well, but when it comes to the season production, it's not even close. Jauan Jennings averaged 14 points per game last year, finished as the wide receiver 25 in PPR points per game, had 77 receptions, 975 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, and we saw what he's capable of spike week wise. Target share had a 26% target share, and we've seen Brock Purdy produce wide receiver production for multiple players, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and last year with Jennings. Jennings is the wide receiver 1 in San Francisco, and he's being treated like anything but that. I think he could beat his ADP by 15 spots in the wide receiver positional finish.
I agree. I've already sung my praises on him. He's been a huge buy for me for all the things that you said. And I think health is another major factor. The 49ers have never been reliable as far as the information they give on health. The health concerns for the entire team, this seem to be like a plague for, I think, since Kyle Shanahan's been there. They seem to consistently have these injury problems. We forget that Brandon Ayuk could be slow to come back, or we're anticipating that he's just going to come back from ACL and be the exact same player. I think that we underrate just how much Kyle Shanahan does whatever he wants and does things that aren't norm. Cause it's like you said, a lot of people think he was a 7th round pick. This isn't real. This is I think they're like, put him in the same bucket as like Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. And then there's like the guys like me and you single-handedly keeping that ADP at like 37 right now. He's someone that I've held in Dynasty and if not made trades for. And then in redraft, he's one of the easiest clicks because you're getting him wide receiver 3, 4, 5, depending on how your build is.
Yeah, and I think that's the power that he gives you, where you can get Jauan Jennings as your flex or your wide receiver 3. That could turn out to be an absolute cheat code for you, especially in wide receiver heavy type builds. Love Jennings. We had 2 tight ends drafted inside the top 15 overall picks, a historically high result when it comes to NFL draft. But you have a rookie tight end that you're flag planning that is not Colston Loveland. It is not Tyler Warren.
No, it's Terrance Ferguson. And I want to give the caveat that a lot of this is dependent on his cost. I'm not saying you should go out of your way to take him over George Kittle, but when you consider what you need from a tight end to be productive, what they do, and what system that Sean McVay has, it feels like a perfect match made in heaven. One, the most predictive metric as far as tight ends go is athleticism and draft capital. He has both. Another thing is passing volume, if not being a top 2 target. Now we have Davante Adams there, who is 32, but I still think he has a lot left in his tank, and I like Davante Adams at his ADP as well. That's another story. It's the volume factor, where we've seen the Rams are willing to throw that ball 1,000 times if they need to. And now they do have a defense, and they've made efforts to improve their secondary, but they tend to give up a lot of points as well. So when you think about that volume and Terrance Ferguson, it could easily be the 3rd target in that offense. I'm not really concerned about Jordan Whittington, or especially a lot of people are concerned about Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee had like 89 yards last season. He's never been particularly healthy, and he's never been particularly good. I'll take the young player that the Rams were willing to take in the 1st round. If you saw their draft video going around, I'm incredibly bullish at cost.
Yeah, he's an elite athlete, and also, like you said, it's a really cheap cost to make, and it's almost a second half of the season type hammer bet you need to make. Where like beginning of the season, I think it's going to be hyper targeted Puka Nacua, hyper targeted Davante Adams, and a sprinkle of Tyler Higbee mixed in. But with Ferguson, I think he overtakes Higbee at some point early on in the year. You might end up having usable Terrance Ferguson over the second half of the year. And what's interesting for Dynasty is Davante Adams, like I love, but you're talking about a guy who's going to be 32 years old. That's a difficult bet to make for 2026. Ferguson, like this could be the move tight end that we've sort of thought that a Sean McVay offense has sort of always been rumored to be trying to get. Like we saw them trying to get Brock Bowers last year. We can only imagine like the Bowers Nakua combination this year, how fun that would be for fantasy. But with Ferguson, it's a guy that the organization loves, and I think McVay has big plans for. Compared him to Chris Cooley in the post conference, and anybody who remembers Chris Cooley, like when McVay was in Washington, Cooley was terrific. So this is a really fun one in Terrance Ferguson. And for me, it's an annual tradition for me to tout David Njoku because the market will continually fade Njoku. He's the tight end 12 right now on multiple formats, somewhere in that tight end 11, tight end 12, depending on what format you're playing in. And David Njoku over the last 2 seasons, tight end 7 in points per game in 2023, tight end 4 in points per game last season in 2024. This is a guy who has unbelievable production in terms of spike weeks. This is a guy who can take over a game and help you win the week from the tight end position. And David Njoku is also about to get a contract extension. There's a lot of rumblings that he's going to extend his contract in Cleveland. I know there's a lot of Harold Fannin Jr. buzz, and I like Harold Fannin Jr. I know you sung his praises throughout the draft process, but at the end of the day, Harold Fannin Jr. is one of the youngest tight ends in the NFL next season. David Njoku is in a great spot to be a top 2 target of his team. You brought up that tight ends, you want to see elite athleticism. David Njoku still has elite athletic ability despite being 28 years old this year. But David Njoku also has the ability to be a top 2 target on his team. And even easier than any other metric in fantasy, if I can just find a tight end who's the leading target or the second leading target on their team, that player is going to be fantasy football viable. Like the Seattle players, we're seeing a significant discount on Cleveland Browns players. And I think it's specifically Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku are beat up in their ADP because we don't know who the quarterback is in Cleveland. No matter who the quarterback is in Cleveland, they're going to be hyper targeting these 2 players. Njoku is an easy pick for me to return value at his current ADP.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of tie Njoku and Ferguson together here because tight end's an interesting position. If I don't get Bowers, if I don't get McBride, I'll take a shot at Laporta here and there. I'll take a shot maybe at Loveland, but I pretty much just fade it and I double up on guys like Njoku, where I know it's just like at the end of the day, I was like, he has the same upside as like, I know it's just crazy. George Kittle at this point in the 49ers career, you know, like in his 49ers career and what that offense is. I'll take Njoku and Ferguson, these 2 guys who are much lower. So I'm not taking these wide receivers that are inevitably going to outscore the tight end in a vacuum, all in the name of positional versatility. Because as we've seen, it's only maybe 3 or 4 tight ends that are true difference makers. And then you just need steady eddies or guys with upside at the back end of drafts.
Yeah, I'll take David Njoku in every single format, redraft, best ball, dynasty, and he'll return value for me. And Jagger, this was a lot of fun. Love talking about our flag plants today. Let everyone know once again where they can find your work.
Yeah, everything's over at Fast Draft. I'm getting into best ball mode. Obviously, it's why I keep talking team builds here. I'm going to get in a little bit more strategy and team building and not just much player take. So if you guys are interested in that, I talk dynasty, best ball, redraft, whatever. I'm just talking ball.
Yeah, highly recommend checking out all of Jagger's work over at Fast Draft channel on YouTube. That's a lot of fun, and he's putting out high quality content pretty much every single day. You're putting out something at this point in the year. Stick with us here at Fantasy Football Daily, dropping multiple episodes next week. Make sure you check out the Jim Coventry episode where we break down all of these new offensive coordinators, and check out the School of Scott episode that I just recorded with Ryan Heath, where we talked about strength of schedule can help you in all your formats. Stick with us here at Fantasy Points all off season long. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.